this is about risk, and it's about very serious allocation and responsibility issues between this generation and future generations and amongst generations at any point in time. It's quite clear, and it's for the most rudimentary inspection of the science, that this is a global issue. It's global in its origins, it's global in its impacts. So pretty obviously, the economics of climate change is about, subtitle here, risks, ethics, and a global deal.
We are too late to avoid quite significant damage from climate change already. If we start strong mitigation early from now, then we can avoid what the scientists tell us is the worst of the effects of
people must realize what the implications of inaction would be in the field of climate change. And we have come up with some projections of the future in respect of extreme events that might increase in intensity as well as frequency. And we've also clearly brought out where our knowledge is not adequate to come up with fairly robust and reliable projections.
Why do we put any credence in any of these projections at all? Why should you believe me? You could ask, what if we had computer models in 1850 and you knew what the buildup of greenhouse gases was going to be, and how well would they have predicted the last 150 years? And that's exactly what's done here with today's computer models. There are three different colors here, if you just bear with me. The blue band is if in one of these computer models you ask it to project Earth's climate over the last 150 years, but without any buildup of greenhouse gases. Let's say there were no industry and no deforestation. The pink curve is what happens if you add in the effect of the human-made buildup of greenhouse gases, and the black line is the actual observed temperature change on each of these continents. You will notice that the pink, the simulations that include the greenhouse gas change, has a very good representation of what actually happened continent by continent, while the blue, which leaves out the greenhouse gases, doesn't reflect what actually happened in the climate, particularly for the last 50 years.
Unless there's action to change things, you don't pay for the impacts on others. So you're not bearing the costs of what you're doing in the way you normally would in a market. And it's those signals in the market, the main markets work well, so this is a market failure. It's global, it's long-term, through these lag stories and the flow stock process. It's highly uncertain and it's potentially very large and irreversible. So that's taking us fairly quickly to a kind of target level that we might think about, provided we can make a good case about why it's so bad to go to these higher temperatures. If you get the stabilization, that tells you an enormous amount, stabilization target, that tells you an enormous amount about where the economics should go. Now, the economics is very, very strongly shaped by the science. I'm not a scientist. I did do mathematics as an undergraduate, but that doesn't make me a scientist. And it is remarkable how many economists and lawyers and politicians suddenly become incredibly authoritative scientists when they start to look at this problem.
This was a report trying to convey information about why this issue is significant, why it's significant to you, and to point out that there are new results coming in that, as they have been over the years, saying, and it looks like things are getting worse faster than we thought they were. And that's because, in part, scientists were sort of being cautious in their predictions, and then it turned out the world is proving that, yeah, indeed, some of the impacts are occurring more rapidly and more severely than we had thought.
Now, I think that the climate change science is far from settled.
This climate change is real.
Stop trying to change me. I am what I am.
If
few challenges facing America and the world are more urgent than combating climate change.
I don't need you to save me. I don't need you to save me.
Climate change is one of the greatest enduring challenges that we face as a nation.
The threat of climate change is real, and there are concrete and affordable ways to deal with it.
Today I announced one of the largest and most important structural reforms to our economy in a generation. The introduction of a carbon pollution reduction
stop this
scheme.
reckless rush into a damaging emissions trading scheme, sit down with the coalition, negotiate with us and other parties and the independent senators.
What is happening to the Liberal Party?
Well, I guess what we're seeing is some people who want to stop the climate change bill at all costs.
This emissions trading scheme legislation, which is really an energy taxation scheme, does deserve the most rigorous scrutiny by this Parliament.
I'm proud of the fact that the first thing we did in government was ratify the Kyoto Protocol. I'm also proud of the fact that we boosted the renewable energy target to 20%. I'm proud of the fact that we tried 3 times to get an emissions trading scheme through this Parliament, although we failed. And if I add one point of future policy, it must be our ambition to pass a carbon pollution reduction scheme within this Parliament, the one that follows, I mean, so that we can make a difference.
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead. I'm determined to price carbon because history teaches us that the countries and that the economies who prosper at times of historic change are those who get in and shape and manage the change.
The role of CO2 is not nearly as clear as the climate catastrophists would suggest. I also think that if you want to put a price on carbon, why not just do it with a simple tax?
We want to say, first, we don't want a carbon tax, and second, we do want an election.
There is no time to waste. Before turning the floor over to Dr. Pachauri, I want to pay tribute to him and to the thousands of scientists and staff who have worked so tirelessly over the years to help all of us understand and grasp the severity of the climate change phenomena. The IPCC's diligent work is the key building block in our efforts to mitigate the effects of climate change.
The final vote in the Senate paves the way for the most comprehensive carbon price scheme outside Europe. It's a triumph for the Prime Minister.
Today, Australia has a price on carbon as the law of our land. This comes after a quarter of a century of scientific warnings, 37 parliamentary inquiries and years of bitter debate and division. Today, our nation has got this done.
The tax is aimed at making firms more energy efficient and encouraging more use of gas and renewable energy. But the outlook is uncertain. The government has a majority of just 1. Many voters are hostile to the laws and the opposition has vowed to repeal them.